The camera stopped rolling and the spotlight dimmed, but the greatest dramatic decision of Marilyn Monroe's life was about to unfold on a rainy, darkened street in Los Angeles. She had just left a premiere dripping in diamonds, yet when she ordered her driver to halt for a crying bride who had run from the altar, she sacrificed her safety to confront a secret more agonizing than any Hollywood scandal. The flashbulbs were a weapon, bright and unforgiving, trapping Marilyn inside a world of blinding applause and forced smiles. She was the diamond, the global obsession, but inside the suffocating glamour of the limousine, peeling away from the triumphant premiere of Some Like It Hot, Marilyn felt only the crushing weight of being a performance and desperately needed to find Norma Jeane again. Her team, a wall of suits and security, had her on a strictly timed escape route toward a quiet residential section of Los Angeles, determined to insulate the fragile star from the night's overwhelming success. The plan was simple: rapid retreat, total silence, and a bottle of champagne she didn't really want but her handlers insisted upon. But life rarely followed a script. The driver, a cautious man named Al, was cutting through a little-known, tree-lined street near Beverly Glen, a place rarely visited by the celebrity circus, when he slammed the brakes. The sudden, violent deceleration threw Marilyn forward, her famous blonde hair momentarily obscuring the view. Al was swearing under his breath, muttering about debris in the road, but it wasn't debris at all. Standing frozen in the center of the asphalt, glowing almost supernaturally in the spill of the limousine's headlights, was a woman in a full, traditional wedding gown. She was clearly in a state of crisis. The veil was torn and hanging sideways. The intricate white satin dress was streaked with dark mud, and her entire body shook with silent, agonizing sobs. She wasn't holding a car key. She was clutching a wilted bouquet of lilies as if they were the only thing tethering her to the earth. The sound of her crying, muffled by the thickness of the limousine glass, was a low, devastating hum that nevertheless cut through the expensive silence of the cabin. This was a sound Marilyn knew intimately, the sound of profound, unfixable female grief. Marilyn's personal assistant, Patricia, immediately started her routine, hissing, "Al, pull around her. We can't stop Marilyn. She's probably just a publicity stunt." Patricia knew the rules. Keep the star moving, keep the star safe, keep the star performing. Stopping was never an option. The world expected Marilyn to pass by, a beautiful, untouchable myth. But Marilyn didn't move toward the champagne. She moved toward the window. Her eyes, which minutes before had looked exhausted and hollow, were suddenly fixed, focused, and intensely empathetic. They weren't seeing a publicity stunt or an inconvenience. They were seeing a reflection of every time she herself had stumbled in public, nakedly vulnerable and completely alone. The assistant's words trailed off as Marilyn reached out a manicured hand, placing a single firm finger on the button for the driver's intercom. The security team braced themselves. Instead, the voice that came over the intercom was low, steady, and utterly decisive. "Stop the car," she commanded, her voice sounding nothing like the breathy caricature the world adored. "Do not move. Stop the car. Now." The abruptness of the order hung heavy in the air, radiating from the star's sudden focus. Al hesitated only for a moment before complying. It was a command no one dared countermand. The great machinery of Hollywood, which existed solely to protect and propel Marilyn Monroe, had momentarily stalled for one small weeping bride who had literally thrown herself in its path. The driver cautiously opened his door. The handlers fidgeted nervously, their faces etched with shock. But the blonde siren in the back seat was already pushing her own door open, stepping out of the protection of the fame bubble and into the cold night air. The fate of one bride's wedding day, and perhaps the fate of the secret that made her run, was about to collide with the legendary compassion of the world's most desired woman. The night air was suddenly thick with the scent of expensive perfume and damp satin, a surreal collision between the queen of Hollywood and a distressed commoner. For Clara, the bride, the sight of Marilyn Monroe emerging from the long black limousine must have been like a vision, something impossible conjured from the depths of her despair. The contrast was stark. Marilyn, glittering, versus Clara, whose perfect white dress now looked pitifully ruined. But Marilyn saw past the satin and the spectacle. She saw only the raw, shared female heartbreak and the profound loneliness reflected in Clara's desperate eyes. Marilyn's security detail was in complete panic. "Miss Monroe, please, get back in the car," her driver urged. Marilyn waved him off with a gesture so commanding, so final, that the men froze where they stood. She moved slowly, deliberately, until she was just a few feet away from the weeping Clara. She didn't speak empty reassurances. Instead, Marilyn simply reached out and placed a hand, surprisingly warm and steady, on Clara's mud-streaked arm. "Honey," Marilyn whispered, the kind of voice you reserve for a sister. "Tell me what you're running from, because I know that feeling." Clara looked up, her blue eyes wide and swimming with tears. The bouquet of lilies dropped to the ground. A surrender. "They told me I shouldn't." Clara choked out, the sound ripping from her chest. "They told me he wouldn't forgive me. I ruined everything. I ran." She was utterly incoherent, trembling so violently that Marilyn gently guided her, not back to the church, but into the warm, velvet sanctuary of the limousine. Once the door was closed, sealing them into a private world, Marilyn pulled a silk handkerchief from her sleeve and dabbed gently at Clara's eyes. "No one is running anymore," Marilyn said firmly. "Now you are safe. You tell me the secret that made you run from the altar, from the man you love." Clara took a shuddering breath, the fame and the luxury of the car momentarily forgotten. All that remained was the overwhelming kindness from the most famous woman on earth. She began to speak, weaving a tale of weeks of anxiety and a sudden, terrible argument just moments before the organist was due to begin. She confessed the core of the crisis. The secret she had held so close was an unexpected blessing that her groom, Thomas, had viewed as an unbearable shame. Clara lowered her gaze, folding her hands protectively over her abdomen, and uttered the incredible truth that had caused the terrible separation from her fiancé. "I'm 3 months along," Clara confessed, her voice barely audible. "We wanted a baby, but not yet. When Thomas found out, he didn't see our child. He only saw the gossip, the people counting months on their fingers. He told me he couldn't face the judgment and that if I walked down that aisle, he would be too ashamed to say, 'I do.'" That raw confession hung in the air, a devastating portrait of love undone by fear and the relentless pressure of social convention. The truth was finally out. Marilyn leaned back, her expression now etched with a profound sadness and sudden recognition. She looked not at the tear-stained bride, but at the place on Clara's abdomen where new life was already beginning. This crisis, born of love and fear, touched Marilyn on the deepest, most private level, for it involved the very thing she herself had always craved but never achieved, the dignity of motherhood. Marilyn knew in that moment she was not just saving a marriage. She was protecting a future that mirrored her deepest, most private hopes. The soft whir of the limousine's climate control provided the only sound. For a woman whose every conversation was distorted by the papers, Marilyn offered Clara a sacred sanctuary where the truth could be spoken without consequence. "He found the doctor's note," Clara whispered. "He saw the date, and before I could explain, he accused me of having a private relationship with someone else." The accusation itself was enough to make Clara's breath hitch. The real heartbreak came when she finally made him understand the baby was his. Thomas's anger dissolved, replaced by a deep, agonizing panic, a fear of judgment that was contagious and consuming. He kept saying, "The whole town will be counting. My mother will never forgive me." Clara recounted. "It wasn't that he didn't want our baby, it was that he wanted the perfect traditional wedding first. He said we should cancel everything, get married quietly later. But I couldn't lie about our child." Marilyn listened patiently. She knew the tyranny of appearances better than anyone. Thomas's fear, she recognized, was not of his bride, but of the cruel whispered judgment of the town elders. Clara explained that Thomas had given her a brutal ultimatum in the vestry. He said, "Walk down the aisle now, tell everyone it's too much, and we'll figure it out later. Or walk down the aisle and announce the pregnancy, and I won't be standing there when you arrive." Forcing Clara to choose between her dignity and her love. The weight of that ultimatum had sent Clara running into the street. She had chosen her truth, but risked the separation from the man she loved. Marilyn's voice was suddenly sharp, cutting through the silence. "He wants you to choose shame over your child's truth. He wants you to hide the purest act of love in your life because he fears the whispers of society. This is the moment, Clara, when you realize that shame is a more terrible weapon than rejection." So he's still there, Marilyn realized, waiting for the ceremony to be called off, waiting for you to surrender to his fear. She saw Thomas not as a villain, but as a man paralyzed by the fear of scandal. The tragedy was not the pregnancy. The tragedy was the shame forced upon a genuine love. Marilyn reached out again. "Honey, you didn't ruin everything. You chose the truth. Now, we must make sure the truth gets the celebration it deserves and that your man realizes which fear is greater, the fear of gossip or the fear of losing you forever. Marilyn leaned in, the glittering gown seeming to fade away, leaving only the woman who had suffered countless private heartbreaks. She didn't speak of fame. She spoke of empty rooms and the crushing weight of wanting a family, a quiet acknowledgement of her own deeply felt pain from losing her pregnancies. She spoke about the times she had been counted, judged, and diminished by the public eye simply for being herself and for daring to hope for the very life Clara was now carrying. For Clara, this was not Marilyn Monroe, the movie star, but a shared soul, someone who knew that the greatest tragedy was a love story that didn't get to become a family. "The world loves to count," Marilyn murmured. "They count your age, they count your weight, but that counting is just shame dressed up in a lace veil. And you, honey, you have the most beautiful reason in the world to refuse that shame." Marilyn reminded Clara that the baby was proof of the passionate love that brought them to the altar. "The only shame here is him choosing gossip over your heart and the life you carry." She stated firmly, "Your courage in running was your first step toward motherhood. Now we are going to make sure Thomas chooses you." She began to sketch a plan, her mind working with the focus and precision of a director. Thomas was trapped by fear. Marilyn knew they had to break that paralysis with a powerful, unscripted moment of truth. "He doesn't need to be punished. He needs to be seen," Marilyn explained. "He needs to be reminded that the only eyes that matter are yours. He's a good man who made a terrified mistake." She took Clara's hands. "You are not going back there to apologize. You are going back to offer him a final, clear choice. You, the baby, and the truth, or the fear of his mother's opinion. He must choose his family." Marilyn then laid out the instructions. Clara would go back alone, walking that aisle as a declaration of independence. Her presence would shock the congregation into silence. She was to speak directly to Thomas, cutting through the noise of the ceremony, and demand his commitment to their child first, their marriage second. The advice was deeply personal, an offering of the fierce strength Marilyn wished she had always possessed. She had armed Clara with unshakable self-worth. The plan was audacious, relying entirely on the power of unvarnished love to conquer fear and shame. Marilyn knew Thomas had to witness his bride's dignity to realize the depth of his error. This quiet meeting was transforming a broken woman into a courageous bride, prepared to face the world and the man she loved, head on. Now, all that was left was to ensure Clara looked the part of the triumphant woman ready to claim her life. In that velvet interior, Marilyn Monroe began the most important makeup session of her life, preparing a woman for the fight for her own happiness. The grime and despair covering Clara were superficial wounds. Marilyn was determined to use her famous mirror to show Clara the fierce, worthy woman staring back. The act was intimate, quiet, and profound, a moment of deep connection between two souls separated by fame but united by the desire for unconditional acceptance. Marilyn first produced a silver hip flask from her travel bag, filled with water, and gently cleaned the streaks of tears and smudged mascara from Clara's face. She insisted on reapplying Clara's lipstick, a soft, confident rose hue, using her own iconic compact mirror, the same one that had reflected every great Hollywood triumph. "This mirror has seen some things," Marilyn confided. "It has seen me afraid, and it has seen me triumphant. Remember what it reflects now. A woman who is strong, who is beautiful, and who is about to claim her life." As she fixed the veil and carefully smoothed the mud marks on the skirt of the white gown, transforming Clara from a tragic runaway back into a composed, determined bride, Marilyn drew out a small, exquisite item from her purse. It was a vintage, engraved silver compact, a personal treasure, slightly worn, given to her long ago by a mentor. "I want you to have this," Marilyn said, pressing the cool metal into Clara's palm. "Whenever you feel that shame creeping back in, or whenever you worry about what people are counting, you open this and look. And you remember that the most famous woman in the world, the one the newspapers pretend to know, stopped everything to tell you that your love and your child are worth fighting for." It was a talisman of Marilyn's own hard-won self-worth, a priceless, deeply personal gift of courage. Clara, completely overwhelmed, could only manage a choked whisper of gratitude. She had come across a desperate moment of fear. She was leaving armed with the quiet, potent strength of Marilyn Monroe herself. The final piece of advice Marilyn offered was the most powerful. It wasn't about makeup. It was about demeanor. You walk back in there, and you do not apologize for the time you took or the confusion you caused. You walk in as the woman who had the courage to tell the truth. Your eyes must be fixed on Thomas, and you must hold your head high, for you are carrying your future. You deserve respect, Clara. Demand it. With a final encouraging squeeze of the hand, Marilyn directed Al to take Clara back to the church, instructing the driver to drop her just outside the vestry door and immediately return. She had given Clara the tools, the plan, the courage, and the iconic keepsake. The physical transformation was complete, ready for the final audacious act. The bride who had fled in terror was now returning with the unshakable confidence of a Hollywood star, ready to face the world and the man she loved, head on. The sanctuary was thick with whispers, the kind of terrible, expectant silence that only a high society wedding delay can generate, while Thomas stood rigid at the altar, desperately trying to project composure as his world crumbled beneath his stiff, white tuxedo. The organist, running out of improvisational filler music, had finally stopped playing, leaving the air heavy with the question, had the bride run away for good? It was into this charged vacuum of anxiety that Clara returned, appearing at the main entrance, transformed from a panicked girl into a woman of quiet, unshakable resolve. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. Clara's gown was still smudged, but her face, thanks to the star's gentle hand, was serene, her eyes fixed entirely on Thomas. The guests parted as she began her slow, deliberate walk. She walked straight toward Thomas, stopping right in front of him, closer than any formal wedding protocol allowed. The entire congregation held its breath, witnessing a drama far more compelling than any planned ceremony. Thomas looked devastated, guilt and relief warring fiercely on his face. He had expected her to return defeated. He was utterly unprepared for the dignity in her posture. The whispers in the pews stopped completely, replaced by a deafening hush as guests recognized the gravity of the silent confrontation. Thomas's guilt was visible, a heavy cloak draped over his shoulders, weighing him down with shame. Clara reached out, placing her hands on the lapels of his tuxedo. She spoke only to him, her voice strong and clear. "Thomas," she began, the raw emotion burning in her voice, "I love you, and I am standing here because of the life we have already created. The truth is, I'm 3 months pregnant with your child, and I will not begin our family with a lie born of fear. I ran because you chose the shame of others over my honesty. Now you must choose again. You choose the whispers, or you choose us. But I will walk down this aisle only as the proud mother of your child." It was a final, undeniable ultimatum. The strength of the woman before him shattered the fear that had paralyzed Thomas. He saw the fierce conviction in her eyes. He finally understood the depth of his cowardice. He had almost lost everything he held dear. The realization hit him, the shame lifted, replaced by an overwhelming tide of relief and love. Thomas dropped his jaw in a silent, profound surrender. Tears welled up in his eyes. He took a staggering step forward, disregarding the officiant and the guests. He pulled Clara into a fierce embrace, a hug that was less formal acknowledgement and more a drowning man clinging to his lifeline. Into her hair, he whispered the words that healed the damage. I love you both. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. Let's go get married now." The sound of genuine, unconditional acceptance echoed in the silence. Thomas's tears were visible now, soaking into the satin of Clara's veil. He clung to her, shaking with the overwhelming catharsis of choosing his family over society. It was a breakdown, a moment of profound repentance and love, witnessed by every tearful guest. The congregation, which had expected a tragic cancellation, was instead gifted an unscripted moment of pure, redemptive love. A ripple of applause started, then swelled into a full, sustained, standing ovation. It was not just applause for the wedding, but for the courage of the bride and the redemption of the groom. The tears that fell now were shared tears of joy, washing away the fear and ushering in the honest beginning of a family, a moment that owed its entire existence to a woman watching from the shadows. The most perfect wedding was often the one that embraced its beautiful imperfections. She stood just inside the cavernous church doorway, a luminous ghost. Marilyn Monroe watched as Thomas and Clara clung to each other, bathed in the soft light, and felt an unexpected, powerful surge of peace. This was the unscripted ending she had always craved. Two people choosing each other unconditionally. The applause swelled, a truly genuine roaring sound. Marilyn didn't join the clapping. Instead, a single perfect tear tracked a path through her foundation, a tear not of pain, but of profound maternal happiness. She was crying for the beautiful baby who would now be born into a home secured by dignity, and she was crying for the little girl inside her, Norma Jeane. She knew instantly and absolutely that she could not stay. If she stepped forward, the cameras would find her, and the narrative would become about the star who saved the wedding, stealing the precious focus from the couple. Marilyn made her escape, slipping back into the solitude of the night. She signaled to Al, the driver. The massive black car glided through the streets, pulling her away. "What happened, Miss Monroe? Did she make it?" Al asked tentatively. Marilyn looked out the window. "She made it, Al," she confirmed, a quiet smile gracing her lips. She made it exactly where she needed to be. Her security assistant, Patricia, finally recovered. "Miss Monroe, that was highly irregular. We should have never stopped for an unknown." Marilyn slowly turned her head and fixed Patricia with a look that was both regal and deeply weary. "Patricia, sometimes the most important stops you make in life are the unscheduled ones," she said simply. "That woman was not a fan. She was a crisis. And for those few minutes, I wasn't Marilyn Monroe. I was just a woman helping another woman choose truth over fear." She knew the secret promise of the wedding was the only truly real thing she had touched all night. The star left the scene of the triumph, knowing the greatest gift she could give was anonymity. The wedding reception was now a joyful, riotous blur of relief and celebration. Thomas, beaming, held Clara close, astonished by the miracle of her return. The guests toasted the happy couple, marveling at the strength of a love that had faced down scandal and won. Sometime between the main course and the cake cutting, a discreet, plain white envelope was slipped onto the newlyweds' table. It was delivered by an unfamiliar courier who immediately disappeared, ensuring no one could connect the small package to its giver. It was so subtle it almost went unnoticed until Clara finally picked it up. "What is this?" Thomas asked. Inside, beneath a simple folded note, was a personal check written out for an astonishing amount. It was signed only with the words, "A friend of the bride," but it was the note that brought fresh tears to Clara's eyes. The message instantly connected back to the surreal sanctuary of the limousine. The note contained only 8 words. "Shame is just a cage. Choose the bold beginning." The reference was clear and undeniable. It was Marilyn Monroe. She had not only saved the wedding, but had gifted them the financial freedom to build the family they fought for, without the burden of debt or the pressure of immediate need. This was more than just money. It was a powerful statement ensuring their brave new family would start life free from the suffocating pressure and financial stress that often accompanied an unconventional start. This was not a loan or a charitable donation. It was a deeply personal validation of Clara's courage. The money wasn't intended to spoil them, but to ensure that the birth of their baby would be celebrated purely as a joy, not a financial stress. "Who would do this?" Thomas murmured, staring at the sheer generosity, completely oblivious to the legendary source. "A friend of yours, from work. You must have a very generous friend." Clara shook her head, unable to speak. Clutching the note and the compact, she knew she could never reveal the secret, for that was clearly the giver's intent, to remain the unseen benefactor, the quiet angel who provided dignity when it was needed most. She simply reached across the table and squeezed Thomas's hand, a silent promise in her touch that their family's bold new beginning had just been secured. The gift was a monument to Marilyn's belief in them, a priceless act of grace given without any expectation of public thanks or recognition. Years passed, folding one into the next, filling the space between the dazzling premiere of Some Like It Hot and the twilight of Marilyn Monroe's life, a time marked by isolation and fame. In a hidden drawer of her bedside table, she kept a small, private treasure box, reserved for the relics of moments the world would never know. And inside that box, tucked beside a frayed photo of her mother and a poem by Arthur Miller, lay a single, simple, slightly creased thank you note that was more valuable to her than any Oscar. The note arrived nearly a year after the wedding, bearing no return address. When she opened it, she found a tiny, faded photograph, a picture of a 6-month-old baby girl, smiling widely, her eyes shining with pure, untainted joy. The accompanying words from Clara were filled with a gratitude so deep it transcended mere thanks. Clara wrote about the birth, how they had welcomed their daughter without fear or shame, spending the money from the anonymous gift to ensure a beautiful, peaceful home nursery. She wrote about Thomas, who had become the most fiercely protective, adoring father, and who often confessed that running away had been the greatest, scariest mistake he almost made. Then came the true, tear-jerking revelation that made Marilyn weep. Clara wrote that she and Thomas had chosen the baby's name as a permanent tribute. "We named her Norma Jeane Thomas," the letter concluded. "We wanted her to carry the name of the woman who taught us that dignity is the most precious thing a family can own. She brings us more joy than we ever thought possible, and we owe it all to the quiet compassion you showed that night." Marilyn stared at the baby's photo at the perfect innocent face of Norma Jeane Thomas. The moment settled over her, quiet and profound. Here, in this tiny, smiling child, was the legacy she had always longed for, a real, stable family founded on honesty. She realized that this child, thriving in love and security, was the only family she had ever truly been able to protect. No film, no award, no fleeting flash of public adoration could compare to the quiet, unshakable joy of seeing Norma Jeane's name and smile on that picture. The actress who felt so disconnected from her own past finally found a beautiful, loving way for Norma Jeane to live on. She carefully placed the letter and the photograph back in the box, sealing the beautiful secret back into the private corner of her life. She realized then that all the fame in the films paled in comparison to the power of that quiet act of kindness. The world saw her as Marilyn, the commodity, the desirable image, but in the eyes of Clara and Thomas, and now in the life of little Norma Jeane, she was something infinitely more profound. She was a protector, a healer, and a silent godmother who had saved a sacred truth. She had found a fragment of the unconditional love she always sought, not in a man or a movie role, but in the destiny of a family she had never intended to meet. The actress who felt so disconnected from her own past finally found a beautiful, loving way for Norma Jeane to live on. The world remembers Marilyn Monroe for the image, the breathy whisper, the iconic white dress, the blinding shimmer of $1 million smile. A masterpiece of manufactured glamour that hid a multitude of private sorrows. But the true measure of a star, the genuine indicator of their soul, is not found under the klieg lights or on the front page, but in the small, unseen moments when they choose humanity over celebrity. The entire life of the legend, the struggles and the triumphs, boiled down to one selfless, spontaneous decision on a rainy side street. What makes that night so heartbreakingly beautiful is that Marilyn didn't stop for fame. She stopped for connection. She stepped out of her bulletproof bubble not to pose, but to simply offer a fellow woman dignity in a moment of terrible need. She spent her power, her time, and her money not to gain adoration, but to ensure that a love story, threatened by the same societal pressures that tormented her, was allowed to flourish. She wasn't an actress playing a role. She was Norma Jeane, the compassionate godmother, providing the stability and protection she had always wished for herself. For Clara, that 15-minute encounter in the limousine changed the course of 3 lives. She went from a terrified bride fleeing her wedding to a courageous wife choosing her family. The legacy of that moment wasn't the anonymous check. It was the ability to look her child in the eye and say, "You were born out of honesty, love, and immense courage." And little Norma Jeane Thomas, growing up safe and secure, was the living, smiling proof of Marilyn's heart. This story, which remained a private secret between 4 people, is a beautiful, necessary reminder of the tragedy that truly defined Marilyn Monroe. The world constantly demanded the blonde goddess, the witty performer, the unattainable object of desire. It rarely made space for the empathetic maternal woman who longed for roots, stability, and the simple joy of unconditional acceptance. She was forced to be an icon, but she wanted desperately to be a human being. On that night, kneeling in the plush comfort of her car, giving away a priceless compact and a piece of her hard-won wisdom, Marilyn found a profound fulfillment that her movies could never offer. She used her legend to save a life, to validate a love, and to ensure a baby was named after her true, private self. She proved that success is not measured by the numbers on a marquee, but by the number of hearts you heal when no one is watching. She gave Clara not just courage, but the ultimate gift of dignity, allowing her to proudly claim her child and her future. The world may never have known this story while Marilyn was alive, but the private letter, the baby's photo, and the simple engraved compact stand as silent witnesses. They testify that the most vulnerable and scrutinized woman in the world still had the capacity for the purest, most selfless love. The tragic ending that followed for Marilyn did not diminish her compassion. It only highlights the fierce, radiant kindness she harbored within. She stopped for a stranger and, in doing so, created the happiest family she ever knew, quietly fulfilling her deepest wish to foster a beautiful, honest beginning. This story is a powerful reminder that the true heart of Hollywood often beats loudest in the quietest moments. If Marilyn's spontaneous act of grace touched your soul, please hit the like button and subscribe right now. You won't want to miss the next untold secret of the legends.